Gear of the Dead, Chapter 9. The next morning, after a huge breakfast in the dining room, I came back upstairs and started sorting through the gear. All the stuff didn't make up for all the birthdays and Christmases Josh had neglected, but it came pretty darn close. It was all state-of-the-art equipment, most of which I'd only seen advertised in climbing magazines. Camp stove, coils of rope, cams, titanium ice axe, crampons, thermal gloves, digital camera, O's regulator, face mask, tent, sub-zero sleeping bag, sleeping pad, altimeter watch, carabiners, batteries, ascenders, pythons, harnesses, climbing helmet, headlamp. Everything I needed to get through the death zone. Most of the clothes were too small, especially the boots. I suppose Josh couldn't have asked my mom for my sizes without tipping her off. And he couldn't have asked me because until I passed the physical, he wasn't sure I was going, which got me to wondering, what would he have done if I had failed the physical? But only for a moment. The gear called to me, and nothing matters when you are up to your knees in brand new, expensive climbing equipment. It took me 2 hours to figure out the altimeter watch worked. An hour to set up the tent. I faced it with the opening toward the window so I could see the Himalayas. I snagged a couple of photos of my view from the digital camera. Then I got hungry and decided rather than go down to the dining room, I'd cook up some food on my brand new camp stove. I know this sounds goofy, but I get a little out of control when it comes to gear. I opened the window so I didn't get carbon monoxide poisoning. As the freeze-dried beef stroganoff was simmering away, there was a knock on my door. I thought it was housekeeping again. They had come earlier and asked to clean the room, but I told them I had everything I needed and to come back tomorrow. I slithered out of the tent, carefully stepped over the stove so I didn't tip it over and burn down the hotel. Cracked open the door, hoping they wouldn't smell the gas burning or the food cooking. But it wasn't the housekeeper. It was a Nepalese boy about my age, but 2 inches shorter. He was smiling up at my head, which is all I had revealed through the crack. Below my head, I had nothing on but boxers because I'd been trying on all my gear all day, and it was getting hot in the room from the stove and the sun coming through the window. "Peak Wood?" he asked. "Actually, it's Peak Marcello, but yeah, that's me. My name is Sunjo. Zopa sent me over to bring you to him." "Oh, sure. I glanced at the mess behind me. I didn't want to leave him standing in the hall while I got ready, which was going to take a while. Appearing like a total idiot won over being rude. I let him in. Sunjo looked a bit shocked at the setup, but he didn't burst out laughing, which I might have done if I had stumbled upon someone equally as stupid looking as my indoor camp spot. My dad, Josh, got me some new gear and I was testing it out so I would know, I forgot. "I'm making some lunch, are you hungry?" Sunjo said he was. As I got dressed, I watched him checking out the equipment, and I knew he was a climber. No one else would fondle gear as lovingly. He picked up various items like they were more valuable than gold, which they were when they were the only thing keeping you from falling off a rock face or into a dark, bottomless crevasse. I cleared a spot for us on the bed and served him a bowl of stroganoff and an energy bar for dessert. It turned out that Sunjo's father had been a Sherpa. Unfortunately, he had died up on K2 the previous year, trying to rescue a group of climbers. Only one of the climbers survived. K2 was discovered in 1856 by a surveyor named T.G. Montgomery. The K stands for Karakoram. The 2 means it was the second peak Montgomery listed in the survey. At 28,250 feet, it's a bit shorter than Everest, but most climbers agree it's a lot harder to reach the summit. I told Sunjo how sorry I was to hear about his father, but he shrugged it off, saying he hardly knew his dad. He and his 2 younger sisters had spent most of their lives at a private boarding school in northern India. My sisters and I only came back to Kathmandu on holiday. He said my father was usually up on the mountain during those times. Hearing about his sister caused a little ache in my belly for Paul and Patrice, but it went away as soon as I watched Sunjo casually tie a length of spectra cord to a hex slung with a triple fisherman's knot. "Where did you learn to climb?" I asked. My grandfather instructed me. His English was better than mine. He had kind of a British Indian accent. Mine was kind of a Bronx, Cody, Wyoming accent, which did not sound nearly as cool or refined as his. "So you're on holiday?" "No," Sunjo answered. When my father died, we no longer had funds to keep all 3 of us in school. The tuition is very expensive. My sisters are still in school, and I am here to find work so they can stay there. Without a formal education, there is no future for girls in Kathmandu. I would like to go back to school myself, but it is unlikely I'll be able to. It is more important that my sisters attend school than it is for me. Sanjo wasn't much older than I was, and I wondered what kind of job he would get that would pay the tuition. He looked at my altimeter watch, which he had been playing with throughout lunch. We should leave soon. Zopa is waiting for us at the Hydraean temple. I turned off the stove and put the dishes in the bathroom sink. Did you know there's a dining room here in the hotel? Sanjo asked. I have not dined there myself, but I hear it is quite excellent. Yeah, I ate there this morning. It's great. The reason I cooked, well, you know, the new gear. Sanjo smiled. He knew exactly what I was talking about. Our transportation to the temple was the saddest motorcycle I'd ever seen. There was more silver duct tape on it than chrome. It took him 6 vicious kicks to get it started, and when it finally caught, the motorcycle belched out a column of gray smoke so thick I thought the bike had burst into flames along with my new friend. But the smoke cleared, revealing a coughing Sanjo with tears running down his face and a mostly intact motorcycle, except for the bolt lying in a pool of oil under the engine. It is much better when we are moving forward, he gasped. This way the smoke cannot catch us. I thought about running up to the room and grabbing my climbing helmet, but I was afraid Sanjo might die of asphyxiation before I got back out. So I climbed on behind him and we lurched into traffic. Sanjo yelled something that sounded like, only 2 root beers left, go! But I think he meant the motorcycle only had 2 foot gears, fast and slow. He was right about our exhaust being behind us. The problem is that we were now speeding through everyone else's exhaust. For the next 20 minutes, I squeezed shut my burning eyes and buried my face in his back, thereby missing most of Kathmandu. We have arrived, Sanjo announced. I clutched my sweaty hands and opened my eyes. You must remove your shoes before entering the temple. I took them off and put them next to the about 50 other pairs of shoes and sandals. If you don't mind me asking, Sanjo said, what happened to your face? It got frozen to a building. Sanjo laughed. No, really. A climbing accident, I said. That's what I thought. I followed him into the Hydraean temple, which was like walking into another world, one where people whispered rather than shouted. There was no wandering cows. We had narrowly missed 3 of them on the way over. No horns honking, no screeching tires. The smell of flowers and incense saturated the air. Worshippers were kneeling in front of shrines, spinning prayer wheels, lighting butter lamps, mystery, possibilities. This was the Kathmandu I had expected. Sanjo led me to a teak bench in the shade of a banyan tree. He sat for a while watching the orange-robed monks talking quietly to the visitors and offering them blessings. Which is Zopa? I whispered. None of these. Shouldn't we let him know we're here? Sanjo shook his head. He'll be along when he's ready. Waiting again, but I didn't mind. I spent the time trying to figure out how to gracefully bow out of a return trip to the hotel on the death motorcycle. Here he comes, Sanjo said. I expect Zopa to be a frail old holy man, and the monk striding toward us was old, but he was anything but frail. His arms and calf muscles, which I could see of them beneath the hem of his orange robe, were well defined and powerful. You expect a Buddhist monk to have spiritual presence, but whatever spirituality Zopa had was overwhelmed by his physical presence. When he reached us, he put his palms together and bowed. I followed Sanjo's lead by getting to my feet and returning the bow. Zopa looked me over, frowning at the scabs on my face and ear. Climbing accident, Sanjo explained. Zopa pointed at my bandaged fingers. Split nails, I explained nervously. They're almost healed. You look like your father, Zopa said. And actually I look more like my mother, but I wasn't about to disagree with him. How did you get here? Motorcycle, Sanjo said. Zopa shook his head in disgust. When you go back, take a taxi. He reached into a fold of his robe and came out with a roll of rupees as fat as his fist. I didn't think Buddhist monks were even supposed to look at money. He peeled off 1/2 inch of bills and handed them to Sanjo. What about my motorcycle? Sanjo asked. If you're lucky, Zopa said, someone will steal it. Wait for me at the hotel. The monk turned and walked away, and I was relieved about the taxi, but didn't explain why he had come all the way down to the Hydraean temple. When I asked Sanjo about it, he just shrugged and said Zopa had his own way of doing things. Mysterious ways, as it turned out, because when we got back to the hotel, Zopa was already waiting for us in the lobby. I didn't recognize him at first because the orange robe had been replaced by regular street clothes and expensive-looking pair of sunglasses. The sunglasses made him look like some kind of celebrity, which I suppose he was to the trekkers and climbers gathering around him. It had taken us 10 minutes tops to catch a taxi outside the temple. We drove straight to the hotel, and traffic wasn't any worse than it had been on the way to the temple. And yet, there was Zopa chatting with the hotel staff and guests as if he'd been there all afternoon. I looked at Sanjo, expecting him to be as shocked as I was. He wasn't. Zopa does things like that, he said. How? Another shrug, which I learned later was everybody's answer to the questions about Zopa. You'll get used to it, Sanjo asked. Then we went over and greeted the vacationing monk. Now, you're probably wondering why I didn't ask Zopa myself. Believe me, I was tempted, but I didn't think he would tell me. Or worse, he might give me some reasonable explanation. It seemed like asking a magician to tell you show how he did the trick, or asking a tiger how he got those 17 freight cars painted in a single night. It's all about the mystery, and sometimes it's better not to ask. Up in the room, Zopa sorted through the gear, putting it in different piles, while Sanjo and I watched. Once in a while, he would stop and have me try something on and say, fits, doesn't fit. When he finished, there were 3 piles. He pointed to one of the piles. We'll take this and trade it for things that fit. My boots, snowsuit, several other clothing were on a separate pile with some other stuff. I pointed out that none of the things in that pile fit either. I have another use for it, Zopa said. I didn't know what that could be, but I didn't pursue it. Instead, I pointed to the trade pile, which had several $100s worth of pythons, cams, ropes, and other expensive equipment. This gear is brand new. You won't need it to get up Sagar Martha. This is what the Nepalese call Everest. My dad bought it, I argued. He might need it. Your dad told me to make sure that you had everything you need to climb the mountain. How much money do you have? I told him, but I didn't mention the credit card Mom had given me. I didn't think she'd be happy about a huge bill for Everest gear. It's not enough to get the things you will need. Hopefully we'll be able to trade all this in. He started to gather up the gear from the trade pile. Best not to argue, Sanjo whispered, and he and I helped haul the gear downstairs, where a Toyota truck and driver were waiting for us. It took hours to get the replacement gear, and in the process, I got quite a tour of Kathmandu. It seemed that most of the places Zopa liked to shop were located down dark, scary alleys. He was warmly greeted wherever he went until the bartering started. Then he and the proprietor would end up in shouting match until a bargain was struck. The most difficult thing to find were my boots. I'd try on a pair I liked and tell Zopa they fit great, and then he would make me walk and shake my head. Not right, he said. What do you mean? I insist they fit great. Too small. When your toes fall off inside from the swelling and pinching, they will fit perfectly. We finally agreed on a pair that did fit great, but they were pretty battered up on the outside. In fact, all the stuff we bought was banged up. I hope this gear wasn't taken from dead climbers, I said, offhandedly. Zopa looked horrified. Bad luck to use gear of the dead. No, this is from people who came to Kathmandu to climb and decided it's better to stay in the bar and drink. I must have looked horrified myself. Don't think ill of it. They lived. Zopa had bought a few things for himself and Sanjo, who I guess was coming with us to base camp, by the gear he was getting. Unlike me, he listened carefully to Zopa's opinions and bowed every time the monk gave him something. It was late when we got back to the hotel. We went to the room, packed everything, and loaded it in the truck. We leave for Tibet tomorrow morning at 6, Zopa said. He and Sanjo got in the truck and drove away.